Hey, hi, how are you? Welcome back to more tier lists! Don't get so excited in the comments. Listen, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't actually super planning on making more of these, but then the ones that I did make were getting more views than other videos I made, so by God, if it appeases the YouTube algorithm gods, we're gonna make them. It's not like I don't put effort into these, but they often feel significantly lower effort than some of the other videos that I put out there. But by God, YouTube likes them, we're gonna make them. This one's gonna be a bit more focused on high-end. I know I've made a power rankings guide before, but this is a little more hyper-specific. This tier listing and rankings of jobs is entirely based upon how I think they rank based on a week 1 prog setting. Now, what do I mean by week 1 prog setting? I mean, you are in Pentamelded Crafted gear, going and trying to clear a new tier of the raid on Savage on week 1, blind, figuring out mechanics, what jobs will help you achieve that goal the best, make your time the easiest, and let's just get right into it and get started. Let's talk about what I consider to be actually one of the best jobs for prog, hands down, hands up, hands sideways, hands any which way you want, and that is Red Mage. Red Mage has an on-demand raise. Red Mage has pretty okay damage for having an on-demand raise. And in case you don't know what I mean that Red Mage has a built-in system called dual cast, which means that anytime you cast a spell without using a dual cast proc, you will get a proc of dual cast, which allows your next cast to be at instant speed. Red Mage has a spell called Veraise, which is a raising spell, which will pick up somebody off the ground. Red Mage has an instant cast every other GCD because of dual cast. You get where I'm going. They can pick up everyone all the time and keep you rolling through instances and fights as long as you're not doing stuff that wipes the whole party. Now, I personally thought that aspect of Red Mage was more than good enough to put them in S tier even before the current expansion came out. But now, Red Mage, on top of, having Addle, and Addle having been buffed to now include 5% all mit, essentially, that will always mit whatever damage is outgoing by 5% minimum, 10% of it's magical. They also have their Magic Barrier now, which is a magical 10% mit, or like 10% magical mit. That also provides a healing up bonus. So Red Mage stonks are even higher. And don't get me wrong, if you can't play the job well, obviously, stick with what you know. But it's definitely a case of, if you can play Red Mage well, and you're going for really early clears of fights, it wouldn't be a bad idea to bring a Red Mage. Red Mage is a really powerful job right now in terms of progression rating because of all the tools they bring. Which is what brings me to the next job on the list. Scholar. And you might be like, why is a healer so high? Let's talk about what Scholar brings, right? Scholar brings a really powerful party buff and chain stratagem, because of the way that it functions, meaning it stacks with buffs like Devilment and Battle Litany, because it increases the rate that something takes crits, not the rate at which you are critting, which is 2 different stats, mind you. So it's very powerful in that regard. And also, Sacred Soil stacks damage resistance in a different way than other damage-resistant things, because Sacred Soil means you take 90% of the damage dealt. Which means that you stack it with something like, say, their magical mit, Fey Illumination, which I believe is 10% mitigation. Forgive me if I'm wrong. It's either 10% or 5% magical mit. Either way, it is a flat additive thing at that point. Those things add together to give you either 15% or 20% mit, depending on what Fey Illumination is. I apologize, I don't know all the numbers in this game off the top of my head. But the bottom line is that Secret Soil mitigates differently than other mitigations, making it stack much better with other mitigations. Making it just a very, very powerful spell, skill, ability, whatever you want to call it. Combine that with the fact that the fairy does a lot of healing to whoever is lowest, which typically means you're getting an extra regen on the tank, but can often just top up DPS who might have been out of healing range. They have both a AoE regen as well as an AoE heal on that fairy, which they don't have to stop damaging for or waste any other resources for. Plus, that fairy can turn into a Seraph and provide some pretty powerful healing and shielding over time. And Expedient. Just straight up Expedient. If you don't know what Expedient is, you're missing out. It is a 10-second sprint with 20 seconds of damage mitigation tacked on as well. That is party-wide. It is incredibly powerful. I believe Scholar is by far and away the strongest healer for progression rating right now. And it's just really, really, really powerful right now. Don't get me wrong, the other healers are fine, the other healers will work, but I just find Scholar to be the tip top. Something I didn't really bring up as much when I was talking about Red Mage, but is also important to it, is something that I'm going to bring up for Scholar, and that is loss of gauge material on death. So for a lot of jobs, when you die, you lose stuff you have built up in your gauge. Now, Red Mage falls victim to it. However, Red Mage has so much powerful stuff in the kit that I feel like them losing all their resources on death is not near enough of a negative to counteract all of the positive that they can bring. And besides, consider the fact that they have an ability that ties up, that gives them extra gauge on a 110 second cooldown. Magnification has a weird cooldown. To essentially make sure that as long as they don't die, like right after they pop that, they'll always have at least one burst window available for 2-minute windows. Like, they still do pretty well, even if they do die. Sure, it sucks if they lose all their gauges, because they could get off like a triple melee combo. But still, and if my voice sounds like it's drifting around, it's because my cat is attacking my feet, and I'm trying to make her stop. And if you want to see more cat pics, go follow me on Twitter. I post them there all the time when people redeem channel points rewards for them over on my Twitch stream. Look at all this shilling! We're 6 minutes in and we've already shilled so much! But yeah, Scholar's busted. It doesn't really lose a ton on death. I believe it loses Fairy Gauge and any Aetherflow stacks it was sitting on, but honestly, Fairy Gauge is really only used to link up your Fairy to a tank right now and provide a pretty powerful regen. Sorry, I had to mess with the cat. But it's not a huge loss. It's not the end of the world if you lose it. But speaking of tanks, Warrior, S tier. Warrior is an S tier job for progression. Holmgang is on such a short cooldown. Warrior also has, like, so many skills that are so good in so many ways. Like Bloodwetting, able to keep themselves topped up, as well as being a powerful mitigation skill, which also doubles as Nascent Flash, which can heal up party members, making the healer's job even easier. Combine that with the fact that they have Thrill of the Battle and Equilibrium for massive self-healing on top of their already good self-healing. So good. Holmgang being the shortest invulnerability cooldown. Shake It Off giving both a heal up front and a pretty powerful shield, which is good for any type of mitigation. That's something that we actually ran into this tier in particular, is that some hits actually dealt physical damage, but we didn't know it. When you don't know what damage AoE hits deal, skills like Shake It Off are more valuable, because shielding is always good. Whereas if you only have % magical mitigations from, say, a Dark Knight or a Gunbreaker, then obviously it is a little bit harder to mitigate properly if you don't know what type of damage it is coming out. And I think that just kind of pushes Warrior up into the S tier. Combine that with, like I said, their massive self-sustain, their ability to have a really short cooldown on their ultimate. Ultimate? Wow, I meant to say invulnerability on Holmgang. I'm sorry, I'm clearly tired. I need to keep drinking my caffeine. But let's talk about the next S tier job, and that is actually Monk. You might be surprised to see this here, but if you know me and you know my love of Monk, you won't be surprised to see it here. Monk's a really strong job. It provides phenomenal personal DPS, loses very little gauge build-up upon death, unless you're dying at exactly the wrong time, the job still gets to keep DPSing no matter what, and its party buff is really powerful. A 5% damage buff for 15 seconds is pretty good. I didn't even bring up the fact that Red Mage has a party buff, by the way, but I feel like it doesn't even need to have that to be so good. But it does have one, and Embolden is very powerful right now. Moving back to Monk, though, it also has something that I think is just good in Mantra. It is an AoE ability that will just make everybody heal more. And in prog scenarios, that is, in my opinion, invaluable. If you have fights that have hard DPS checks, like, say, Curtain Call from P4S right now, that is a hard DPS, that is a hard healing check, as well as being a good DPS check. So you want your healers to be able to heal more for less. And give them Mantra, the next 15 seconds, they might have to toss out 1 or 2 less GCD heals because of that 10% boost. A very powerful skill. Now, I put Monk at the bottom of the S tier because while it does have Mantra and Brotherhood, two very powerful things for a party, it doesn't really bring much else crazy good. It does also have Riddle of Earth, making it tankier, making your healers have to heal less. But it's like, it just barely makes the S tier because I value Mantra so highly as someone whose raid team actually really got great use out of Mantra throughout a lot of the tier. I value Monk and Mantra very highly. And as someone who occasionally swapped jobs to something like Ninja, which doesn't have Mantra, my healers noticed. My healers noticed, and they were like, I'm healing less. So, if it's something to the point where your healers are noticing, you can tell it's an impactful skill. Alright, so let's talk about the next job on the list, which I am literally having to pull up my screenshotted version of this, so I know exactly what I'm going to talk about. Because, God, there's so many jobs in this game to bring up as far as tier lists go. Like, my goodness. This video is also, as you can tell, very off the cuff. Very, all over the place, very casual. It's just kind of a chatting about why I value these jobs the way I do. It's gonna end up being really damn long at this rate. But next is actually Dancer. Now, why do I think Dancer is so good for prog? Well, upon death, all they lose is their feathers and whatever procs and esprit gauge they had built up, which is not a lot of material. Standard Stuff Drifting isn't as big of a deal anymore because of its slightly lower potency than it used to have, or comparatively lower potency. Combine that with the fact that if you know for a fact one of your melee DPS is very good, or say you have like a monk, the Dancer will profit, as will the monk. I'm using my own static as examples here, yes. The Dancer and the monk will both profit enormously from each other. The monk will get to deal more damage and have better crit rates, causing you to meet DPS checks better. And the Dancer will be getting more spree procs off some job like a monk. Now, don't get me wrong. There's other things that push Dancer up besides the fact that they buff one party member by 5%. Sorry, I almost said the wrong number. By 5% and give them a 20% crit D-hit buff. They also have a really powerful party buff that is 5% for 20 seconds, which is huge! Just huge. But combine that with the fact that they have, you know, the classic Fizz range mitt, which all Fizz range have, so that doesn't really put it above other Fizz range. But it does give it a plus. And the fact that it has improvisation, which is good for downtime. Which I believe now both boosts healing and applies a regen effect. Very strong. And just a little tiny burst heal in Curing Waltz. It's like 300 potency, but that's a cure that your healers might be able to rely on in heal checks. Very, very useful. It's a really good job. It and Monk, in my opinion, depending on like how good they are in the fight, could easily swap places between S and A tier at any point in time. They are both right on that line between S and A at the moment. I'm personally just valuing Monk a little higher right now over Dancer because of how the current tier worked out, to where melee uptime was pretty easy to maintain. But in fights and tiers where melee uptime might be a little harder to maintain, Monk might drop in value a little bit. This list is not fully static and will change over time as jobs get adjusted as well. So this is basically what it's like pre-6.2. This is like the end of 6.1, pre-6.2 tier list ranking. Next job, Ninja. Might be a little surprised to see Ninja rated so highly, but I do love the job and I think it brings a decent amount. It's a very mobile melee that does not lose a lot upon dying, it doesn't lose a lot of its gauge resources, it mostly just loses Ninki gauge. And you don't even really lose access to your Mudras anymore because they gave you a new skill which will immediately reapply your weapon skill speed buff instantly. It's incredibly, incredibly useful. Top of that, it has the kind of the scholar thing of its buff makes something take something more so than buffing you to deal more damage. Because Ninja's buff will basically make the target take 5% more damage, more so than buffing your damage by 5%. Once again, it's a math thing. They are slightly different ways of applying buffs. So if any way, like, diminishing returns come into effect, because it's a different technical term about how it works, it can be rated higher. It's also just 20 seconds, in the same way that Dances is 20 seconds, allowing almost all jobs to fit their entire burst window inside of it pretty damn easily. So because of those things combined, Ninja gets rated pretty highly IMO. not losing anything on death, having a really powerful party buff, and just being a mobile, powerful job that as long as you can get off your burst windows every minute and 2 minutes, then you're kind of sitting pretty. Next up, Astro. Now, while I have lots of complaints about this job, I cannot deny its powerful ability in prog. Cards and divination are very good ways of buffing your party. It does have less personal DPS as a result, however, it kind of works out evenly because of that. If your party is pumping damage, then the Astro will get more value out of their everything. And if the Astro is pumping damage, they get more value out of their everything too, though, so. They also sit here because they lose absolutely nothing on death, essentially. They don't lose any of their seals. I don't believe they even lose the cards they've drawn. Feel free to correct me in the comments below. Feel free to yell about how wrong I am about all these things and that I've said something incorrect, and then we can converse about it in the comments and all learn together. But the bottom line is Astro is like almost a mana positive job because of how much mana you earn from cards and from Astrodyne. Meaning that the job just doesn't really have any massive drawbacks from death, especially since it doesn't even lose its seals on Astrodyne, which is just great. Combine that with really powerful burst healing instead of neutral sect. Exaltation and Celestial Intersection being just like nice little tools to help your tanks out during busters. Like, Astro's just got a lot going for it. It might be a really busy and cluttered job right now, but that doesn't stop it from being really powerful in prog and having really powerful skills. A job that might surprise everybody for me to be placing it this highly is actually Paladin. Now, why am I placing Paladin this highly? For one, it has a lot more personal HP regeneration than it used to, because its magic phase, which is a massive pile of GCDs, is now about 3,600 cure potency for themselves across the course of it, which is really good. The wings that they provide, Passage of Arms, is very, very powerful. Incredibly powerful. Good party mit. You have to really know how to use them to make good use of them, but they are very powerful. And their personal party mit, if that checks out, of which they have 2, in case you didn't notice, they have actually 2 party mits and reprisal, because they have their wings, and then they also have... Oh my goodness, this is so embarrassing to your viewer. I have forgotten the name of Paladin's skill. You know what? We're gonna look this up together. I'm looking it up on my phone right now. I'm so sorry, dear viewer. Divine Veil is the name of what I'm looking for. Which, in case you're wondering why I'm so excited about Divine Veil, is that it has the same use case scenario as Shake It Off. And it even stacks with Shake It Off. So if you like really have a huge hit that you need to mitigate, Divine Veil and Shake It Off together do stack very well. And Divine Veil just, once again, provides a little cure potency on the front end, as well as a shield on the back end, which gets better as the Paladin gears up. Meaning that if your Paladin gets any gear for themselves, all of a sudden your party's mitting more. It's much more nicely suited as an off-tank because of stuff like intervention as well, being able to top up your main tank pretty well and help them mitigate through solo busters. But they also have pretty serviceable case as a main tank. Overall, I think they're surprisingly good right now. That also comes from the fact that even if they die, they can regen enough mana to go into the Requiescat phase really quickly, and their rotation is free-flowing enough that death doesn't really set them back. They do lose some resources on death, but it's not a big deal. And I cannot really understate Clemency's value in prog. As someone who used Paladin a little bit in prog this past tier, being able to just cast Clemency when your party is just figuring out a mechanic and trying to shuffle their way through it and understand it better, it's actually really good. It's actually really, really good, and I cannot understate that. For pure prog cases. After you're out of prog, you probably shouldn't be using Clemency to top up the party, you should be using your damage spells. Next, Summoner. Summoner is bad red mage, quote-unquote. What do I mean by that? It does have a res, but you don't really want to use it very often, but it is there if you need it. It has a personal mit in the form of their Carbuncle Shield, not a party mit. But they're very mobile. They can help fill kind of like a pseudo-second Fizz range role. They have pretty solid damage, and they have a 30-second party buff, which really helps out everybody. It is only 3%, but it's still very useful. But it's really nice to have an extra res. I feel like its value kind of drops a bit because it's just not red mage, you know what I mean? In terms of what it brings, but it is very good. It doesn't really lose much on death, so I really cannot in good conscience rate it any lower than A tier, because it loses so little upon death. So because of that, it has to be solidly in the A tier, kind of at the bottom of the A tier, but solidly inside of the A tier. Let's move on to B tier. Now, you notice so far, S tier are jobs that I'm like, please have these all the time. A tier jobs are like, these are pretty good, don't mind them. B tier is, these jobs are good, but there is a problem with them that, or like several problems with them that prevent them from being higher. It might be losing resources upon death. It might be being a little too specialized in some way. It might just be being a little too weird of a job. And it'll make more sense as we keep going. As I slam Bard. Barely fell down to the B tier here. Barely fell down to the B tier here. But Bard's death recovery is non-existent. If you die at a bad time, you literally just have to wait for your songs to come back. There's no other option. There's no other choices. You just sit there, songless, waiting. You lose so much resources. It is just brutal if you die on Bard at the wrong time. Now, don't get me wrong, it is pretty good. If it's in a fight where Asuna is an ability that needs to be used, Bard's value actually skyrockets because they have an Asuna ability. In Warden's Payon, I believe is the name, where it is an OGCD that will just cleanse any cleansable status effects. So, as much as that's not really a thing most of the time, if that's ever a thing in a fight, Bard's value skyrockets. They don't have like a party healing or boosting thing the way that Dancer does. That's one of the reasons I put Dancer higher than Bard. They do have Nature's Min, which does increase the amount of healing one person receives, which is really nice. But it's only one person. So it's kind of really good. It's good for helping tanks through tank busters, or just like making sure you can top yourself off with a second wind throughout certain mechanics. But overall, it's like just not quite as good as like Curing Waltz or Improvisation. You know, good, but not that good. If you can stay alive on Bard, I'd probably rank it as a solid A tier, but its death recovery pushes it down to a B tier for me. That's something that I'm kind of trying to drive home, is that death recovery for these jobs is something that I'm very cognizant of when I'm talking about them, as you're about to find out, because I'm about to roast the ever-loving fuck out of Dragoon. You die on Dragoon, you're boned. The job's amazing. You buff up your strongest party member by 5% with Dragon Sight. Battle Litany is a crit buff for 15 seconds, allowing most people to hit really hard. It brings pretty solid damage, it has pretty decent movement. But by God, you die, you're in so much trouble. Your life window is drifted. Your Garrus Gogol and high jump might be drifting. You might just not be able to line up properly with the party ever again. If you die on Dragoon, you lose so much value. Because your Life of the Dragon windows are so much damage and so much extra button pressing. And if you don't get to do them properly, you're losing out on so much. So because of the death recovery aspect of Dragoon, for when you're trying to make DPS checks, I kind of have to push it lower. Like I said, if it wasn't for that, it would probably be up there with Ninja, but this is something that for like pure prog scenarios, something that I'm really trying to keep in mind, is that death recovery is important in prog, being able to pick yourself up and keep going through the fight. That's why these jobs are up here, and these jobs are down here. B tier and below essentially is, death recovery is a really big problem for this job. And Dragoon has really big problems with death recovery. If it didn't, I would absolutely slam it A tier, maybe even S tier, but its death recovery makes me personally want to put it lower. Speaking of jobs that I also put lower because of death recovery, Reaper! You lose everything. No soul gauge, no blood gauge, no anything gauge, like... Arcane Circle and Arcane Crest are two very powerful party tools. 3% damage buff for the party for 20 seconds, dope. A AoE regen, that is for, I think, 500 potency, pretty dope. But by God, you lose everything on death. And if the fight has, like, forced downtime in it, you're losing a lot of value because of the fact that Reaper is already essentially a, like, job gauge negative job in full uptime. It has really big problems keeping up its gauge naturally, even with getting to hit the boss all the time. Throw that with dying and losing all of that gauge, it's really, really rough. It's one of the reasons why, as much as I love the job, I'm probably never going to take it into prog. So, sorry Reaper and Dragoon, both the maiming jobs are down here because they have that same problem. They bring lots of great stuff, but by God, you die on that job, you're in the toilet. Now this is one that might surprise people, because I know people value Dark Knight incredibly highly for prog. And personally, I would probably put them in A tier, usually. But at the moment, I'm putting them a little lower in value. Now, why am I doing that? They're AoE mit, purely magic mit. One of their personal mits is purely magic mit. And in prog, when you don't know what damage types are coming out from the boss, that can be a problem. For example, Nearsight Farsight inside of P4S Phase 2 are physical damage. I had a tank that was using Dark Mind to mit them the other day, and they were nearly just exploding. Because they just weren't getting enough mitigation. Because Dark Mind is only magic damage, and spoiler alert, physical damage is not magic damage. My cat has not jumped up in my lap, so if you hear her making noise, that's why. We're just gonna keep going. This is a live video, by God. But yeah, those reasons put Dark Knight a little lower, it being a very busy job, making it hard to weave stuff properly sometimes during burst windows puts it a bit lower. It doesn't have like massive gauge management problems, but dying at the wrong time really makes you have issues because Dark Knight's biggest draw is lots of damage. And if you're dying and having to death recover through that, you're getting not much value. It's very hard for me to like rank Dark Knight this way because I kind of want to put it in A tier. But at the same time, I realize that, like, in a blind prog situation, not knowing what's happening, it loses a lot of value due to the fact that a lot of its mitigations are purely for magic damage. Now, what's next? Gunbreaker. This job dies, it's never recovering. Straight up. Plain and simple. This job dies, it's never recovering. And this decision is partially brought to you by the fact that one of the tanks in my static really loves the job. And he just like flat out told me that I cannot put Dark Knight any higher than this. Not Dark Knight, sorry. Gunbreaker any higher than this. Because by God, its death recovery is abysmal. It brings Heart of Corundum, it brings Aurora. Heart of Light is pretty powerful if you're needing magic mit, but its death recovery feels so freaking abysmal that it is hard to rank it anywhere above C tier because of how busy and how much uptime you need to make sure that you're always getting your cartridges on time, to make sure Gnashing Fang never drifts, to make sure Double Down never drifts. Like, it's rough. Speaking of jobs that are rough, White Mage. Sorry, White Mage. You lose lilies, you lose miseries, you have very little ways of recovering mana. Your death recovery is awful. You bring so much good if you can stay alive, but your death recovery is so painfully bad. Thin Air is nice and it helps. It can make hitting a Medica 2 or a Cure 3 when you're low on mana a little easier on the eyes, but like, by God, your death recovery is so bad. As much as I like the job, and as much as I can admire it as a pure healer that really pumps the heals, its mana economy, if you die, and its lack of resources when you die are really, really tough to deal with. And that's why Sage is also down there with it. I'd probably put Sage a bit higher and organize the tier a bit more like this, with Gunbreaker way there and White Mage kind of in the middle. Sage can kind of recover from death, but they essentially need to have Lucid Dreaming up and then basically be slamming their Adder Skulls off cooldown while still getting value out of them to recover their mana, which is really rough to do. So while Sage can recover from death, it often means you have to spend all of your resources to do it. And combine that with the fact that Sage's like personal healing can be kind of lacking. And they don't provide big burst healing the way that like Scholar can provide big ol' shielding. if you set up properly. All these combined factors pushes Sage kind of down in terms of a blind prog job. I love Sage. As far as healers go, Sage is actually my healer of choice right now. I really love playing it, but that doesn't mean that I want to take it into blind prog. I personally would rather have a Scholar, if I knew how to play it better. But let's go to D tier now, and I'm going to rename this tier Only Good If You're Good. You might notice the 3 jobs that are left are all selfish DPS. So why do they get their own tier? Well, the death recovery of Samurai and Black Mage, really not that bad. Black Mage, you cast an ice spell, all of a sudden you're full MP. Sure, you've lost progress towards your next polyglot stack. Sure, you've probably lost that polyglot stack. But, like, you don't really lose that much. Samurai is the same way. Sure, you lose any Kenki you've built up and any stickers you've built up, your Sen. But it's pretty good death recovery, honestly. Like, they can kind of get back into their rotations really quickly. However, the reason they get their own tier is because they are selfish DPS. And while, personally, I would rather have someone who is a cracked Black Mage than someone who is a very middle tier Red Mage. Simply because they will help you meet any DPS check faster and more efficiently because the job itself pumps more damage. The same way that I'd prefer someone who is super comfortable on Samurai not be on Monk if they don't get the job, simply because they will help you meet the DPS check better. However, if you're not able to perform the job very well, push its limits, really pump its damage out on any of those 3, and you perform very similarly on, say, its, like, quote-unquote cousin job, like Black Mage can play Red Mage pretty decently, maybe you should swap to Red Mage if you're not going to be confident and comfortable in really pushing your damage limits. Maybe the Samurai should be swapping to Ninja or Monk if they're not really comfortable pushing their damage limits and knowing that they can provide the damage that the job needs to provide. Machinist sits in the same boat, but, like, Machinist has gauge problems and job problems. So it's here with a big asterisk of you need to be cracked at Machinist to make it work. But even so, I probably still wouldn't recommend it for blind prog. Its death recovery is pretty bad because of the fact that you lose any and all battery and heat gauge you've built up. And it doesn't provide any party buffs, so you need to really be cracked at the job. That's why it's at the bottom of the only good if you're a good tier. Don't get me wrong. This tier list has not been a case for don't play these jobs because these other jobs are better. This is just how I would like. If I was crafting like a perfect, flawless prog team, you can see it. You can see it. These top 8 jobs here, flawless prog team, IMO. Monk, Ninja, Astro, Scholar, Red Mage, Dancer, Warrior, Paladin. That's it. That's the team. You can see it. Like, you can see what I value as, like, a really powerful prog team. However, there's certainly a case to be made for swapping that Red Mage out for a Black Mage. There's certainly a case to be made for swapping out that Monk for a Samurai or that Ninja for a Samurai, you know? Like, there's a case to be made for someone playing Gunbreaker instead of Warrior, right? Like, just because this is how I value them and view them in a meta sense does not mean that I don't want you to play the job that you want, dear viewer. Please play what you want. Please enjoy what you want. However, this is my, like, power rankings of prog and how jobs deal with death recovery and what all they can bring to a party to bring as much value for their job as possible. It's been a really, really long video, and I hope it was at least somewhat entertaining or at least relaxing to listen to. So thanks for hanging out and watching. Be sure to yell about how I got something wrong in the comments. Be sure to like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I hope to catch you in the next one.